retouching versus glamour beauty retouching, which is very extreme. And we talked a little bit about different techniques, adding blur effects versus adding a neutral density layer to keep naturalistic looking pores. And there are some very good resources, people that I've learned from. The first technique I'm going to show you is a technique that I learned at a seminar by Katrine Eisman called the 5-minute retouch makeover, which is a very, very quick way to smooth out skin if you're doing a portrait session and the person doesn't mind a slight soft look to their skin. The other technique is much more time demanding and requires very, very careful layer upon layer, opacity upon opacity burning and dodging at the most minuscule level to get rid of slight blemishes, but actually keeps the pore structure in place. So we won't be doing that one today, but kind of the queen of that kind of retouching is a woman that her name is Carrie, and her website is Carrie NYC. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and duplicate our background layer. And this is a City College student who volunteered for this. So she's a very good sport. And this first layer is actually a temporary layer. We're going to blur it quite a bit, and we're only going to use parts of it. So I'm going to go ahead and actually, before I do that, let me just make sure I'm all the way back at the beginning of this file here. There we go. There's her hair. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the background layer and add a filter effect, Gaussian or lens blur, your choice. And this is going to look quite dramatic. So here I'm going to keep it at a radius of 15, and you can see that it's very difficult to see here. It looks like we put Vaseline on the lens, which, by the way, is really bad for your camera. Don't do that. And what we're going to do here is we just want to activate primarily the red pixels or her flesh tone. So to make a quick selection, we're going to go to our channels palette here and command click on the red channel. And this is simply a shortcut for selecting the skin tones. You can use any selection tool of your choice to select skin tones. I'm not even going to bother to deselect the areas of her clothing that I don't want, because I can mask that out later. Then I'm going to do a copy and paste or Command J of the skin onto a new layer, and I'm going to throw away our temporary layer here, and I'm going to name this Soften Skin. And so you can see, if I turn it on and off, that it's a very dramatic difference, which is why I did the skin softening first versus the healing or clone tool first, because this actually just got rid of a bunch of stuff. However, she can't breathe. She has no pores. So let's play with some blending modes to see if we can get some of that pore structure back. We're going to choose Lighten as our blend mode, which helps quite a bit. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity down to something more subtle, like a 65 or 60%. And if I turn that on and off, there's a little bit of a difference there. If we want it to be more prominent, we could try something like 70%. Now I turn it on and off. So a lot of the redness, a lot of the darkness has gone away just by a quick softening. However, there are parts of the picture that we don't want to be soft. And these are the eyes and the hair and the mouth. So I'm going to go ahead and add a layer mask, and I'm going to take out this softening filter from areas that I don't want to be very prominent. Okay, and you can go ahead and remove it from her clothing if you want to. So now if I turn it on and off, the softness is just in the skin, and that helped to smooth out some of the redness that we saw happening. The next thing I'm going to do then is add my retouching layer on top. This is a blank layer, not duplicating the background layer so as to save on file space. And then I'm going to go ahead and select my favorite retouching tool, the healing brush, the patch tool, or the clone stamp. I like the healing brush because it maintains texture in the skin. I've got current and below check marked here, so we're going to retouch on the current layer, and it's going to also sample through below. I'm going to option click in a good area, keep it on aligned, option click in a good area, and click over the areas that I want to continue to smooth out. And you may need to zoom into 200%, change the brush with the left bracket, option click, holding down my space bar to mouse around and look for any other distractions here. And again, with portraiture retouching, the goal is to maintain the recognizability of the person, not to turn them into a Barbie. But with glamour retouching, if you're doing something very idealistic, you can certainly push these tools to the maximum level, so to speak. So you might want to spend a little time just zoomed in here, looking for some blemishes that didn't get taken care of. This is kind of a noisy file. It was a high ISO. We grabbed her in the hallway as she was walking by. So remember that lighting and makeup is 50%, and the other 50% in a kind of a idealistic portrait is the retouching, or can be the retouching, I should say, depending on how you light it. So some of the other things that we might want to do, this is just the light retouching of blemishes. And did you all decide to go ahead and work with the shadows underneath her eyes too? Let's make another layer called under eyes. And for this, just for fun, let's try a we're going to get a nice big tool. Let's try the clone stamp just for fun. And when I use the clone stamp to minimize wrinkles or under the eyes, I like to use it at a lower opacity. Okay, and also the brush shouldn't be totally soft, because the edges of the brush give away the fact that we've been retouching if they're too soft. So I'm going to option click and right down below and just kind of make the swoop. It's going to not look very natural, but we're not done yet. Zoom over here, option swoop. You can also do this with the healing brush tool, depending on how much contrast is in the image. Try the healing brush first, because it maintains the texture a little bit better. And if it's not working, then try the clone stamp. And this looks really unnatural, but wait, if I turn down the opacity here, that's a much better look and feel. So she still has shape to her eyes. We've just simply reduced the lines. And if you want to take it a step further, you can use the healing brush on the same layer, and you can get rid of some of the little tiny lines here. And if you decide to do that with the healing brush, make sure the healing brush is nice and soft. And if you don't like something, go ahead and just kind of erase it there. All right. I'm going to go back in time. I liked it a little bit before. Some of the other things that we can do, we can lighten up the teeth and the eyes. So I'm going to go ahead and select the teeth using a loose selection with the lasso. And I'm going to go ahead and make a curve. I'm going to option click on the curve so I can name it teeth. And I'm going to use my targeted adjustment tool here to roll over the teeth and click and drag and brighten them up a bit. And what starts to happen is they get kind of a unnatural color. So I'm going to go ahead and change this into a luminosity blend mode. And when you change it from normal to luminosity, all of a sudden it just affects the tone and not the saturation of color anymore. I'm going to go over to my mask here and feather it out. And so I've just brightened the teeth a little bit. Something else you might want to do is command click on the selection to reload it, and that looks a little funny since I did the feathering here. Maybe I'll unfeather it. Command click on the selection to reload it, then I'll feather it. Feather it back to where it was. And I'm going to option click on use saturation and call it minus saturation teeth. So let's just desaturate. Let's see what tone the teeth are. I'm going to say maybe they're yellow. Let's go to the yellows here. Take my targeted adjustment tool, click and hold, drag to the left, and you see that this is kind of a nice way to get rid of the yellow tint from the teeth, but it leaves the color of the gums intact because we've just reduced the saturation of the yellow. And we can turn that. There's the before, there's the after. Don't forget that anytime you make a mask, it's a good idea to feather it at least 1 pixel, if not a little bit more, anything from 0.5 onward, so that you get you don't see evidence of the selection here. And then I'm just going to repeat. You can put these into a group if you want to stay super organized. New group from layers, call it teeth. Let's make another for the eyes. The eyes look pretty good, but oftentimes, especially if you're preparing an image for print, it's nice to have a slightly brighter eye. So she might look a little weird on screen, but when she goes to print, especially if it's for a magazine, some magazines don't use super high quality paper. I'm going to option click again and choose, call it brighten eyes. Then more contrast helps make the eyes pop. And we're going to go this direction. And to the curves or the mask here, feather the mask. And remember what I said about changing this blend mode to what? Luminosity, if you just want to isolate the tones and not affect. And there's the before and the after. I think that's an improvement. So let's see how we've done so far. If we hold down our option key and click on the background eyeball, which turns all layers on and off, here's our before, here's our after. Already she looks like she's had a couple trips to the dermatologist and the dentist. I still think her under eyes look a little freaky. So I think maybe I'll tone that down a little bit. Again, this is a portrait, kind of a natural portrait. She's obviously in her day street clothes, so that looks a little bit more realistic. Here's before, here's after. We've just made her look a little more rested. Turn that maybe a little bit up a bit. She looks fresh and rested. Some of the other things we could do if we were ambitious, we could retouch out the stray hairs, but I think also we could add a final neutral density burn dodge layer. And this is work, this neutral layer is used a lot in retouching. Remember, we're going to go in the soft light blend mode to help kind of minimize deep lines and so forth, which she doesn't have very many. She's a young chicken here. But I'm going to go ahead and just undo that. Oops, I'm going to turn this opacity down to maybe somewhere between 10 and 15 because I like to build up the amount of lightening that we're doing, and I don't want to go too far with it. Just a little bit here and there. And if I wanted to get back in here and work a little bit more on the lines under her eyes, you could. This time I would go in with the healing brush tool, that's J on the keyboard, and in current and below, and work on some of the tiny little lines here. Work on getting some of those smoothed out. A little bit bigger. And that just looks a little too crazy, so we're going to reduce that down a bit. Do the same over here. And there we go. Okay, so that looks pretty good. The last step, when you add a lot of blur and you add a lot of painting onto the portrait, oftentimes we want to add back some structure. So you remember how we did that on our composites? The last layer usually is what? That's right. You can play with and experiment with adding some grain. Add a grain layer. And a grain layer, remember, is a 50% neutral density layer. What's the blend mode? Soft light or overlay, that's right. And we're going to add a little bit of noise in a Gaussian monochromatic look. Here I'm going to exaggerate it and you can see, get an idea of what it looks like on the image. It's taking a little while for it to come up because I haven't checked preview, that's why. There we go. Ooh, that's a little much. But if you look at movie posters and if you look very closely at ads, a lot of times there's digital airbrushing on the actual ad, and so to bring back the texture to hide the airbrushing, they'll add a tiny teensy-weensy bit of grain back to give back the kind of the filmic look and structure that was taken away by softening. And again, this isn't the most ungrainy image to begin with. So again, here we go, all finished. She looks like she's been on vacation. I'm going to hold down the Option key. Here's our before, here's our after. Does it still look like her, or does it look like somebody else? You be the judge. Again, you can pull back if the under eye's at a lower percentage, if it still looks a little unnatural. There we go, that's a little bit better. All right. Again, we could retouch out the hair if we were feeling more ambitious. Go ahead and give that a shot. You can copy and paste, and then you're going to have to do your retouching on top to make this look natural.